Hi again, everyone. So where are we now? We're approaching the halfway point on day 4 of WFS Live. Do you know what? It's so great when you're 4 days into a 5-day webinar. There's still so much energy in the room. I'm really sensing that on the chat, in the questions, certainly in that last session with going digital and agent fans calling for engagement. Strategies to be creative. I really sense that people were getting involved with that. It was a great session. I'm sure that will continue as we move forward and talk about creative content. And before I introduce the session, just a little note for any journalists present. It's the newsroom by Efe for those news wires in English, Spanish and Arabic. Of course, in terms of the content we're sending around the world, we're working with our new media partner, SNTV, who are part of this next session as well, sending all the content, the relevant content from the clients to their clients. And also, if you are wanting to post on social, you know where we are, at WF Summit on Twitter, at World Football Summit on Instagram. Hashtag is WFS Live. You should know that by now. We're 4 days in, but we're going to crack on with another fantastic panel. Now, we were talking about creative engagement strategies. Let's talk about creative ventures when it comes to content in sport. Now, there have been many contributing factors to the proliferation of content. Primarily, the ability to create being in the hands of us all, right? So you've got smartphones, broadband Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, now 5G coming on stream, and of course having the platforms to put it on, social, digital media. But those alone don't make all content good or creative, but what it does do is encourage an abundance of ideas and creativity at some level. And the traditional power players therefore had to show the most ingenuity of all to stay ahead, because there's plenty of competition. The battlegrounds suddenly got very complicated. You've got the likes of, the brilliantly Third Eye House of Highlights, or the very Gen Z focused Overtime. The tech giants also weighing in with compelling long-form content, episodic content. If you've watched, obviously, Leeds United's Take Us Home, fantastic, real example of how to tell that incredible story so well. But others, including Sunderland Till I Die, or The Last Dance on Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls in the 90s. These are all compelling long form content, which proves that it's not just all about that short hit. Not just all about that snackable content. All this stuff about attention spans declining, it's nonsense. Give them what they want in the way they want, and they will absolutely consume it. Athletes, clubs, leagues, federations, they're all playing their part. In fact, they're all their own publishers these days, aren't they? The battle for eyeballs isn't just against each other, it's against other forms of interaction too. Music, film, using WhatsApp, all those sorts of things. Is to try and keep the attention span of the audience. So plenty to discuss here. Should be a fascinating discussion in the company of the following. The Managing Director at SNTV, James Dobbs, Head of Sports and Stockholm MD at MediaMonks, Nora Henriksson, and the Managing Director at Neo Studios, Anouk Mertens. And to moderate the discussion, Consulting Partner at 7 League, Charlie Beall. Charlie, welcome. Good to see you again. Favourite topic of mine, as I'm sure it is yours. I look forward to what your guests have to say on this topic.
Thanks so much, David. And yes, I hope I can live up to not only your wonderful fashion sense, but your energy and creative introductions. Thanks so much for joining us here. We have a wonderful panel, and I don't want to take up too much time. I'd like to let the discussion flow between us all. A reminder to everyone watching that we do take questions, so please put those in the chat and I'll try and get those asked. But we are talking, as David said, about content. We hear so much these days that sports organizations are seeing themselves increasingly as content businesses. And certainly at 7 League, we, our business is to help our clients build their media business. So, I mean, you could argue that content has always played a crucial role in being a successful sports organization, but it does sort of feel like we're in or are entering a golden age of content for fans. What I'd like to do is just allow the panel to introduce themselves. So if I could start with you, Anouk, you're CEO of Sports Group. Today you're in your capacity of Neo Studios. What's Neo Studios?
So Neo Studios is quite a young and new player in this space. Obviously, we are part of the Acer Venture Group, and we focus on telling good stories. We focus now on sports-related ones, but are expanding to lifestyle and more entertainment formats as well. And one of the latest things that we did with Neo Studios was Take Us Home, Leeds United, the documentary series on Amazon.
Fantastic. And Nora, if I could pass to you, I think many on this I was going to call it a call on this session will know MediaMonks as a big global agency. Where do you fit in, and what's your area?
Yeah, it feels like a call, right? But yeah, we should probably not call it that. But it's kind of intimate, though. I think it's kind of nice. Well, so I say like we're a digital creative partner, and when Anouk talks about storytelling, I mean that's the core of so many things, and I think that's going to be a core of this discussion too. Just like the different ways you can do it, right? And one very kind of recent example is when we did broadcast the NBA in VR together with Yahoo Sports and Riot the NBA returned. And I think that says something about us, how we are kind of using tech, innovation, different platforms, and our knowledge of that platforms, and kind of tapping into cultural relevance, fan culture to create new experiences for different platforms and in new ways, to be honest.
Well, I'll hopefully dive into some more of those in further depth on the call. James, tell us about SNTV, a joint venture between the Associated Press and IMG, but what more?
Right, yeah, that's correct. Thanks, Charlie. So SNTV has been around for about 25 years, and it's the world's leading sports news video agency. So we have crews all over the world every day, covering all the major sports events and sports stories, creating lots of short form content, highlights, press conferences, training, player interviews. We generate about 90 stories a day, which then go out to our customer network of about 1,200 media orgs. So that's the legacy, the traditional part of the business, which is what we're known for. But we've more recently launched a commercial division, which is to use those core muscles of content production and distribution to support brands and federations and sports organizations to create compelling content, but that fits into today's news agenda. So instead of having to sort of pay to place it or create PR pieces, we're trying to create authentic content with these organizations that fits into the news agenda and has credibility. So in a nutshell, that's SNTV.
Thank you. You used the A word, authentic. I think I've heard that quite a few times in discussions around content. Anouk, I think clearly, whilst it is a buzzword, authenticity is massively important. And I think nowhere is this more critical than in the long form docuseries format. Would you mind explaining to us how you do that initial contracting with a sports team or a body that you're covering to ensure that you're able to show all the moments that matter?
Yeah, I think in this world with a lot of phoniness and a lot of fake news, I think many viewers turn to documentaries in search for authenticity and in search for something real and something genuine. And from Neo Studios, that's really something that we want to do, capture real moments. When we always strive to stay close to the real story. And in order to do so, I think obviously with Leeds, we needed Leeds involvement to make this series. And on the other hand, didn't want to give up like the editorial control that we had. We had a very good director tied into it, so he just was all about, well, I need to be able to tell the real story of the season. And we had some very good discussions at the beginning. But in order to make it more real and to get that authenticity in, so we looked for a local crew in Leeds. So it's a local filming crew, a local director who really understands the club, the city, the cultural aspect of it. We had a local artist making the soundtrack for the series, which was really important to tie in that local authenticity. And then we had Russell Crowe, who's is not from Leeds, but is a big Leeds fan, and that made the whole story fit, if that makes sense. So that's something that we really wanted to, make sure that whatever we did and told felt that was real, and I hope that we succeeded in that, in doing that.
Yeah, certainly. I guess there may be some inbuilt advantages in being part of a group that allows that that to take place more easily. Do you have to have that frank conversation if you're approaching other properties about actually, you know, if something bad happens, you don't have the editorial control, or we need to show it? Is that a difficult conversation?
Yeah, it's definitely part of the conversations you have, and it's I think all about building trust, and making sure that that whoever you're working with is convinced that you are trying to do the best to tell an honest story, but also from a documentary point of view. And that's a discussion we had in the very beginning with Leeds as well, because being part of the family is an advantage, but a disadvantage as well, because you really want to make sure that you tell the highs and the lows during, for example, a season. And that combination also makes a good story. If you just tell only the good stuff, I think people see that and see through that, and it gets like a boring story actually. So you need to have that balance in your storytelling, and we try to convince people that that's necessary, and then you need to obviously agree on that. And in having those conversations, access is, as everybody know, really important, but adding authenticity should not be sacrificed for access, if that makes sense. And that's something that we need to balance and convince the people we work with.
Thank you. Nora, if I could turn to you, where have you seen brands, because you work quite extensively with brands, being most creative and successful in their sports-related content?
Ooh, I think but that's also maybe because that's my that was very close to my heart. But when they turn to technology to make IR solutions, like for example, Intel is doing with what they're doing both like in stadiums and what they're doing. We did an app with them where you could see somebody, you know, pogo jumping on your table, and you could like read up on all the information about it and things like that. I think to kind of bring that extra layer, and I honestly I think that there's a lot of things happening in that space, so it's kind of it's easy to kind of mention those, like Intel, for example, or what Google does when they kind of use data to do interesting stuff with sports, to mention those tech companies. But I think there are a lot of brands that tap into that kind of storytelling. And I think in general that there's an interesting connection between what Anouk is talking about and the very, very techy, because you know, I also think like, of course, it exploded with what happened in 2020. There were so many like startups and smaller tech companies doing tech solution for sports, and sometimes it's great. Sometimes I feel it's not entirely tied to the fan culture or the storytelling or the authenticity, if we're going to use that word. So I think like it's two very different things. And I used to actually make documentaries too, not on your level, Anouk, but you know, I have that experience, and now working with something that is maybe more kind of creating new experiences. Sometimes you might believe that that's very far apart, but I think it's not, because I think it has to tap into, and I think Leeds is a very good example too, because they have such strong fan culture, right? You have to be true to that, because otherwise you're not speaking to the fans. And if you're not speaking to the fans, you know, you're not going to have that close and real connection that both brands and sports is kind of, you know, looking for and have a hunger for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. James, you're obviously in a very privileged position to be putting out a huge volume of sport content every day, distributing it around the world, and you get kind of quite good real-time feedback about what's performing well and what's not. Do you have a sense of what fans are wanting more of, what they're hungry for, what's performing well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of the key thing in this in the sports world is if you stick a big name, so if you stick a Messi, Ronaldo, or a LeBron or Serena, it doesn't matter what type of content you're producing. It could be long form, short form, viral, whatever. It's gonna perform. And I think that's one of the key takeaways of this. Athletes now, even more so than the organizations they're part of, are the driver for audience engagement. And that's why brands use them so heavily and spend so much on them, because they really do drive that engagement. Outside of sort of athlete-led stuff, highlights are still incredibly important across all formats because they are more accessible and less expensive than live rights, but also they're bite-sized, so they're better suited to the consumption on mobile devices. And they drive traffic, which for social channels who are relying on ad revenue is incredibly important. But increasingly, because the social channels need a lot of evergreen content to sort of allow that long tail ad revenue generation, the highlights can go out of date quite quickly, so they can't rely on those. And things like behind the scenes, player profiles, that kind of lifestyle crossover is incredibly popular, incredibly successful, because it remains evergreen. They can leave it up there, and it appeals to a wider audience. You know, we might not all be into tennis, but if we can go and have a look around somebody's house, then, you know, that appeals to a lot of people's nosiness. And that's something that was growing in popularity anyway, but was hugely accelerated by COVID as live sport went away, and we all sort of scrabbled around for something to fill the void. So that's a real pattern. And then, you know, in the recent past esports, we've seen the spike, primarily not around the sort of like the shoot 'em up games, but the electronic version of real sports. That's definitely had its profile raised, but we're not seeing a pattern of that continuing outside of its core ecosystems of the streaming channels. But the zoom, that the big one is the barrier to content production has been lowered by COVID. And what I mean by that is that audiences are happy to watch things that are shot on a laptop at home now in these kind of Zoom interviews and Zoom panels. So I think it's really democratized content production, and that is still very popular. And I think that's going to be with us for the long term, actually. So those are the kind of trends we've seen.
Fascinating. There's a lot to unpack there, and possibly we don't have the time even on this call to do that. You did raise the very good point of you know, big stars attracting audiences. I'd say one thing from our experience is also winning helps quite a lot. We were fortunate to work with Leicester City and their remarkable Premier League run, and I think they could have put together some quite ordinary content, not saying that they did, and it would still have performed rather well. And equally, when working with clubs that unfortunately on the verge of relegation, it's difficult to do anything that the fans like. So we are in that unusual world where content and on the pitch performance, unfortunately, or fortunately, are quite linked. But it's I guess part of this discussion is, how do you get away from the on the pitch stuff that you can't control, and how do you create formats that live and can stand on their own? And this is, I guess, central to what you do at Neo Studios, Anouk. How do you approach that that unknown of whether the story you're going to tell is going to have a happy ending, a sad ending, or maybe just a neutral one?
Well, obviously you don't know, and that makes it a very interesting process. When we started 2 seasons ago with Leeds United, obviously we knew that there was Andrea as a new owner of the club. We had this, you know, manager coming in, Beall, who had like this huge aura around him. You had an interesting fan base, an engaged fan base. So you had all the elements there to tell a great story. But obviously you don't know what's going to happen during the season. The ambitions were very high, and it was, you know, take us home on the route back to the Premier League. And we couldn't have envisioned what would happen during that first season that we were shooting. We had Spygate, we had transfers going wrong, we had in the end the season ending up quite dramatically because it was not a win, so they actually didn't make it to the Premier League. And from a documentary point of view, it still worked. It's not because they didn't go up that first season. What was, I think, from my perspective, it was a really painful moment for the club. And I know that people within the club don't like me saying this, but I think the last episode of season 1 was probably the most beautiful one, because it showed the true heart of the club, the resilience, the true passion of everybody involved, and the true drama of just not making it, but also standing up again and say, we're going to do this, and we go again. And that was, I think, a really beautiful moment in the series. And obviously we continued shooting, and we ended up with season 2, where they did promote to the Premier League, and we had other drama like COVID hitting in the midst of that. But yeah, along the way you deal with the stories that come up. Sometimes you stumble upon the story and you follow that storyline, and that makes it interesting and to do this kind of documentaries. And yeah, you just need to go where the story takes you.
I wonder if we could shift a little bit to audiences. Certainly in my day-to-day role, I do quite a lot of work for our client Twitch. And I don't know if that skewed my thinking, but it does seem that consumers and audiences are increasingly becoming to expect to be able to interact with content in and around the content. I don't know if you've seen anything in your work, Nora, around live interaction around content and whether that's going to become more of a thing.
Definitely. I think it's great that you mentioned Twitch, and James mentioned the rise of esports and gaming, of course, earlier on. I think we have so much to learn, and we are adapting to esports. And I mean, we've worked with experiences in Twitch. We've been doing activations with brands in Twitch. We also build overlay tools when it comes to fan engagement that are, similar to that kind of interactivity. Kind of on top of the broadcast. And I feel sometimes that when you talk to people that are, and to be honest, like maybe I'm a bit like that myself, born in the 80s. And, when I see like a final in the Euros or whatever, maybe I'm just going to see it on TV and, maybe I'm going to check Twitter or whatever meanwhile. But you have to kind of understand how you can elevate the experience through that kind of interactivity, and especially for younger audience. And that younger audience has been kind of hard to reach for many sports, and football being one of them. So I think like this 2020 happening and us kind of exploring those areas more than maybe we would have done otherwise, and I'm talking about the sports business in general, I think that is a good thing for actually making sure that we can kind of talk to that kind of audience that are consuming entertainment in a bit of a different way.
And do you think that that change in consumption has come about as a result of the increase in video game play? And has that had an impact on the type of things you're producing?
Yes, I think so, definitely. But that's also because I think that if you're used to gaming, or like in general, if you just grew up in a digital age, you are used to the community also being in the digital space. And for us, I think like when sports suddenly came to a stop due to the pandemic, people were missing that kind of community. And I think it's super, super important when you do these kind of digital experiences that you don't try to copy what we have in real life. I mean, there's nothing that can be compared to go to stadium and see a game IRL, so to say. But there are like other ways to make the experience elevated and to tap into, as you say, like there's a new kind of behavior around the community also being in digital. And that is like what you see in Twitch is of course part of that.
So I guess what we're seeing here is the creation of new forms of sport content value outside of the live rights, which we all know are quite important. James, I was going to shoot to you, and it looked as if you had something to say. When you're creating these new forms of value, I don't know if this links to what you were about to say, but I was going to ask, do you have an opinion on whether you should guard that value and try and monetize it within a kind of paywall environment, or do you have a different worldview as to the kind of like how you should distribute and monetize it differently? We've seen obviously both approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I think your first point there is really important, Charlie, that there is still huge value in those broadcast live rights, and they're integral to most sports still. So it's right and understandable that there's a level of protection and exclusivity around those. However, outside of that content, I think trying to maintain and implement that exclusivity in the digital social space. We're seeing that federations that try and do that are not succeeding. What a lot of people have tried to do is almost retain their premium content on their own platforms and then just release teaser or lesser premium quality into the ecosystem to try and drive people to their platforms where they can own them. Now, the problem with that is, one, is that people who are going to go to your platform and spend money are probably fans of yours already. Or even if they're not, you're only funneling a very small amount of new audiences to your platform. Whereas your largest shop window, this whole social digital space where, you know, the global citizen is and all this huge volume of traffic, they're only seeing your sort of like lower quality content, this teaser content you're putting out there. So the first engagement with your brand that many people will have is potentially not a compelling one, and in fact the alternative of getting them to engage with you, you may even sort of repel them slightly by putting out this lower quality stuff. So what we're seeing is the federations that are succeeding the most are the ones that are knocking down the barriers, really engaging with this kind of open community and putting their best content out there. And that you have to be brave, because you are saying, we are not going to make revenue off this content immediately. It's not a transactional operation. We are going to engage, build our audience, and then it's a longer term engagement. It's longer term value, whether it's around branded content or sponsorship value or licensing opportunities, things like that. So they are brave enough to take away that transactional nature. And that's, I think, why brands possibly at the moment perform better in this space than rights holders, because brands don't see that their content as a revenue generator. It's an audience driver or a loss leader to take people to their core product. And I think maybe rights holders, if they think more like that, will generate that engagement going forward, and that's where we're seeing the most success with our clients.
It's an interesting phenomenon. You'll have upset a few people on the call who would very much like to release short form content as a teaser to drive to owned and operate platforms where they can own the audience and directly monetize them, because they've looked at Disney and all the language around direct to consumer and thought, yes, this is our opportunity to disintermediate our business to business infrastructure and just be able to sell direct to our fans. It's not that easy, is it?
I would just like to sort of caveat that, Charlie, before I fall out with Anouk and Nora, is that I think what I'm saying is probably specifically related to sort of like shorter form content, building brand awareness. I think when you are producing premium documentary in long form, I think there is still an appetite, obviously, for that to reside behind a paywall. But I think for that sort of for brands and federations who are trying to grow their audience and drive engagement with their awareness, I think that the more barriers they can knock down engaging socially and digitally, that the more success they will have.
Well, I mean, I suppose it speaks to a wider question around what content are people prepared to pay for, and in what bundles. I don't know if there's anyone on this panel that would care to speak to that question.
Well, maybe
do you want to,
if I
Anouk?
can. No.
No, go.
James, I agree with what you're saying, and I think for if you look at the short form content, long form content, I think there are ways to creatively tie in all of it together. If I think with my Neo Studios hat on and with 11 Sports, for example, in Belgium, where we are we're the rights holders of La Liga content, and we wanted to broaden the audience for La Liga, get younger people in, and expand the 11 brand. So what we did is actually created a scripted format that started its life on social media and had this actor, a guy who went on a mission to meet Messi, and this whole format lived on social, had an engagement with a much younger audience. Everybody got supportive of him, trying to help him to get to Messi. And at a certain point in time, 11 Sports as a brand came in and say, well, we have La Liga, right? We can help you get there. And then it turned into a more documentary format, when in the end we ended up with having a long form documentary on the 11 channels. But the whole story was kind of what we call a 360 format, created and lived and was made especially for social media. And that really helped us position 11 in the market, La Liga rights in the market, to a broader audience that was not fan of or subscribed to our service yet in the market. Yeah. So that's also a way of trying to make use of each platform the best way and make sure that you get the audience where you want it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think like it's all about the platforms and understanding the platform, understanding the audience that's in the platform. And I mean, you can talk about like how maybe the audience that we mentioned before, like we talked about those that are used to gaming and streaming, like they are also used to those small microtransaction and to pay for user generated content and stuff like that. There might be like new revenue streams if you think about that kind of architecture. But then it's also like about when The Last Dance aired and suddenly people were all into buying Air Jordans, right? And we did the unveil of the latest Air Jordan, where we did like animations of Zion Williamson and other NBA and WNBA stars. That was really like speaking to the basketball culture, the Air Jordan culture. And you kind of have to make sure that you're talking to the audience, to the fans, and also the fans of the brands in that case, in a way that they think like, this is some really cool stuff. And, you know, then it will generate some kind of revenue as like with Last Dance, for example. But you have to really, really understand like how to kind of make best use of the platform to speak to that audience and to make them think like, because I think also when you tune into documentary like yours, Anouk, I mean, then you kind of, you want to see it, but then there's all the other touch points. And we're talking about short format in social media, etc. But you have to make it resonate so that in that kind of, when you're a fan, like you feel like this is actually giving you some more value. And then I think like sports has an opportunity in people being really kind of receptive and positive when it comes to all kind of contents that speak to their heart kind of, or their fandom or whatever. So I think like there's this opportunity, and that's also an opportunity with data, I think, because you give a lot of data away to your favorite club, for example, that you probably won't give away to brands. So I think also clubs have that kind of opportunity where they really have to kind of just serve that fan, because they are also giving you a lot. If it makes sense.
We have a, yeah, completely. We have a question from Pablo Simon Tamborel. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Everyone talks about creating content for clubs and leagues. What about creating content for single players? What should they do or focus on for a better relation with fans and sponsors? Anyone care to take that question?
Yeah, I think we all want to do that. But if I can just start, I think it's a great question, because this is also something that I've seen develop. And I'm so happy about seeing it also being kind of developed organically through the pandemic, because I think like, of course, a lot of content was very strategic when it came from players as well. But there were also a lot of content from players being bored at home, suddenly like dancing in the kitchen with their family on TikTok. And those things have really, or for that matter, being streaming together with other players in Twitch, etc. And that has really spoken to the fan base in an authentic way. And that is something I think we really can learn from this period.
Yeah, I think I had to just echo that and say, away from the pitch, I think, you know, if you want to drive engagement and widen that audience, people who follow a footballer are going to follow him anyway. But if you get him away from the pitch, talking about his personal life journey, what it means to him, what it means to his family, all those things that we don't get to see, the human story, that kind of narrative, that's what widens the engagement and actually makes longer term for a more interesting story, I think.
So, Anouk, what's the market like for docuseries? We've obviously all, as people in the industry, seen the explosion of the format, and across particularly Amazon Prime Video and Netflix. Are there more studios like Neo Studios emerging? Is it a buoyant market in which to create this kind of content?
Well, I think obviously there are a lot of players and a lot of content is being created nowadays, and we are a small player, a new one, the new one on the block, and what we feel is that there is quite a bit of demand for telling these stories, either player related, club related, league related, but even also outside of sports, and being part of the group we're in Ace Adventures, we obviously have a lot of connections and relationships within that world, which I think puts us in a good place to, you know, sit at the table and be part of one of the studios that can create this kind of content. But it either being for streamers or broadcasters or our own companies in the ecosystem, I think there is a lot of things to be made still.
I guess one other thing that we haven't touched on here is the measurement of content. I mean, James, I don't know if you can speak to the point about how you would track the effectiveness of what you're putting out. What are your key measures?
Yeah, I think nowadays, media organizations and sports organizations, there's such an incredible value placed on data that you almost can't have a conversation and win new business without proving your touch points and delivering on your ROI. So we're one of the few distribution channels that we've invested a lot of money in AI technology to track everything that goes out through SNTV gets tracked across broadcast, digital, and social, so we can really measure engagement from every piece of content we put out. And we have, so for ourselves personally, we like to know which of our customers is using our service, and then we can tailor our output, see which stories are resonating. Are people following this press conference, or do they want to see more training from this federation or this club? So we can tailor our output accordingly. But for the value we can provide clients on the back of this, so if we work with a sports club and we put their content out, we can tell them which broadcasters in a specific territory are using their content and what kind of demographics that's delivering them. So the next time they do a cycle of live rights sales, they can be super strategic into that territory. And so one measure of our success is how many new broadcast partners we've enabled for one of our clients because they've had that data. Similarly, if we can prove to one of our clients that their content is being used in X amount of territories and has got X amount of engagement and reach, then that allows them to go to their existing sponsorship partners or potential new sponsorship partners and retain or win that business. So those tangible metrics are really important. And then, you know, we can provide to brands in near real time how their campaigns and activations, if we put a video out for a brand, we can tell them this is performing brilliantly in South America, but it's not doing well in Africa, so you might need to tweak your core messaging. So that for brands, the engagement and the real-time performance, we can tell them. So those are our metrics for our partners, and for us internally, it's about how much new business we're winning, because I said everybody needs to see what value you are providing them, and that the data gives us the ability to actually prove our distribution is working.
With 1 minute and 40 seconds left, Nora, I don't know if you and Anouk care to add anything extra?
I just wanted to add to what James said, like adding that to creativity. I mean, that's so interesting because that's so much at core of what we do too, to add it to developing the creative assets. And I think it's interesting because, like, if you dare try, and maybe people in the sports business have been kind of more daring in this period, and there are such good ways to use the data to get the feedback on what is working and not. So I think, like, it's really time for kind of exploring a lot of new solutions and actually having that kind of very valid feedback on it.
Anouk, I'll leave you with the final word. What's going to be a measure of Neo Studios' success in the next 5 years?
Oh, that's a big question. I think what we definitely want to do is build, you know, the stories that we will continue to tell. And if I look at and when talking to, for example, to Angus Kinnear on leads and tying back into you guys' points earlier, is that while the story on Leeds that we intended to tell never was the objective to to build a brand building piece. It has done exactly that for the club, and if that is something that, from a creative perspective, we make something that has a benefit to the club, to build this audience, to engage with the audience, to it, to present it to its partners commercially as well. It's an important thing for them now, and I think that is something that for us is important to tie in the future as well, and on every project that we do. Try to combine that creative part with the business aspect, and make sure that it gets this additional layer and an additional benefit for everybody who works with us. So I think that's something that we'll be focusing on.
Thank you. David, we've run out of time. Over to you.
We sadly have. I was hoping that we could go again for another hour or so and continue some of those discussions. As I say, it's a bit of a hobby topic, this one of mine. We started off, well, really where we finished talking about Leeds, talking about the authenticity of that tale told so expertly by Neo Studios and on Amazon. And you're right, Anouk. I mean, listen, I've made docs myself, and it can't just be a good story, because that doesn't have the ups and downs, the peaks and troughs. It doesn't have the jeopardy. People need jeopardy in storytelling for them to really engage with it and have that emotional connection. And obviously, it probably would have been an infinitely poorer story had you not had Spygate, had you not had the playoff heartbreak, and then obviously then the redemption tale afterwards, despite COVID, and eventually getting back to the promised land after 16 years away. And as I say, I really enjoyed the way that story was told. And you can, I do wonder. Yes, you're trying to. I mean, you made the point, Charlie, about winning helps, but I do wonder if you're someone who watched Sunderland Till I Die. Maybe you don't support Sunderland. Maybe you watched it because it was a car crash. Maybe you engaged with it precisely because it was another club not doing so well, and then you just think, oh my goodness, how are they still failing at this? I think that in itself is engaging, even if the club and the fans themselves would not necessarily want to engage them more. So I don't know. I'm not sure about that idea, but I see what you're saying. It certainly is a massive helping factor. If your club is doing well, the fans will engage. But of course, it's just a different audience. Nora mentioning, what's done well in tech and the creative solutions that have been found there, but it still needs to be tied to fan culture and authenticity. James telling us what works well for SNTV, athletes driving audience engagement. Highlights you to be careful about the long tail, behind the scenes lifestyle crossover. We've seen that more and more in the last few years. Esports, I did wonder whether they would take the chance during the hiatus, during COVID times, to really steal the show and steal a march. I didn't sense that they really did that, but we did see a spike in the esports, eFootball, less League of Legends, etc. But yes, the audience interacting with content. I do wonder whether we're going to see a slight shift towards things like Twitch. I sense it's a bit of a split. Some, clubs are early adopters. Look at Real Madrid, PSG, Arsenal, Juve. Now Spurs are going. Marseille have gone. La Liga have gone to Twitch. Some creators are going to Twitch. True Geordie is now exclusively signed to Twitch, so deserting YouTube. So there is a bit of a movement there, and I think that is going to develop in years to come. And yeah, great example from Anouk in the middle of the discussion there about the 360 format and approach, and really trying to harness a young audience, especially where you've got a new rights deal in a different territory. How can we make this different? It was really nicely done. That I need to find Messi. How do I find Messi? And starting off with that kern of that idea, and then developing it in lots of different forms. And Nora rightly saying it's about understanding the platform and understanding the fans that live on that platform. What an informative session. Brilliant stuff. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Charlie. Thank you, James. Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Anouk, for all of your input. Really enjoyed it. Right then, on we go, because we are 5 down and 5 to go on day 4 of WFS Live. Yes, still so much content to come. Don't forget, we're going to be hearing from some of the leading football agents in the world before the day is out. And we conclude with an expansive interview with the La Liga president, Javier Tebas. So make sure you stick around for all of that. And we're coming right back in with innovation and artificial intelligence. Don't go away.